Welcome to ASRM Today, a podcast that takes a deeper dive into the current topics in reproductive medicine.
I'm Jeffrey Hayes, and today on the show, I'm interviewing Loretta J. Ross, a scholar, activist, and co-founder of the Reproductive Justice Framework. The discussion explores how the reproductive justice movement expands beyond the traditional pro-choice versus pro-life debate to address a broader spectrum of human rights. Ross explains that reproductive justice centers on three interconnected rights. 1, the right to have children. 2, the right not to have children. And 3, the right to raise families in safe, healthy, and supportive environments. Just a note, the views expressed in this interview do not necessarily reflect those of ASRM. And now my interview with Loretta J. Ross. For listeners new to this idea, how would you go about explaining what, and I'll put reproductive justice in quotes there, what it means in everyday life?
Well, in 1994, I, along with 11 other Black women, thought that the debate on abortion was rather limited. It was separated into the pro-choice or the pro-life binary, but it didn't really describe the decision-making process real women went through when facing an unintended or unplanned pregnancy. And the way we looked at it is that if the woman, when facing an unplanned pregnancy, has worries about whether she can continue her education or her job, or if she's economically insecure or doesn't have health care coverage or doesn't even have a bedroom to put a child in, then she may turn a planned pregnancy into an abortion because she has bad answers to what really are human rights questions. But if she had good answers to those human rights questions, then she may turn an unintended pregnancy into a wanted child. And so you have to look at the totality of a person's life, not just whether they're pregnant or not, to help them make the decisions that make sense for them. And so to address our analysis, we 12 women spliced together the concept of social justice and reproductive rights, which came up with the term reproductive justice to describe, as you said, the right to have a child, not to have a child, to parent that child in safe and healthy environments. And the fourth tenet was added a decade later, which is the tenet for bodily autonomy, gender identity, and sexual freedom and pleasure. And so I like reproductive justice because it's so expansive and adaptable. Because when Indigenous women talk about reproductive justice, they talk about sovereignty issues that would not be pertinent to non-Indigenous women. Yet when immigrant women talk about reproductive justice, they talk about citizenship issues that would not necessarily be germane to those of us who possess U.S. citizenship. And so it is all inclusive and yet can be adapted to a specific population as needed.
In the book, intersectionality is talked a lot about. Can you sort of elaborate on that for our listeners? How does intersectionality, well, one, what is it? And two, sort of in a brief, I know it's a big subject, but sort of what is intersectionality and how does it play? How is it important to this definition of reproductive justice?
Well, the world is thankful that Kimberly Crenshaw named intersectionality, which is basically the ability to have multiple identities at the same time that intersect. So for me, I'm a Black woman who's a grandmother, who's a college professor, who's a Southerner. All of those are my intersectional identities, and you have to pay attention to how they are compounded and reinforce each other to address the specific oppression that may be coming my way. Like if somebody really dislikes grandmothers, I might be subjected to oppression. If they simply dislike me being a Black person or a woman, I might be subjected to different issues. And the attack on higher education has another vulnerability for me. And so every human being has a unique mixture of identities. And unfortunately, threat can come along any axis of your identity. And you really can't describe the complexity of every human being without taking into account all of their multiple identities. But the best way I could explain intersectionality is through a human rights education lesson. Mm-hmm. And that is to assert that every child has a human right to an education, which most people will agree with, but a blind child might need her books in Braille. So you're paying special attention to her vulnerabilities so that she can enjoy the same human rights as sighted children. And you use intersectionality to pay attention to your vulnerabilities so that you can receive the same opportunities and treatment as people without those vulnerabilities.
Is there and again, the book is Reproductive Justice, an introduction. It's so packed, and it has all of these wonderful stories and examples throughout it. Is there one in particular that you think shows how reproductive justice is connected to these broader struggles for equality that you're talking about?
Well, first of all, I want to thank my co-author, Ricky Solinger, who's an amazing writer on all of these topics. And she was the one that urged me to write this primer on reproductive justice with her. There's so many stories. I remember serving as an abortion escort for a child who had flown to Atlanta, who probably was around 12 or 13 years old. And she'd come to Atlanta because she needed a second semester abortion that was not available where she was from. And she was accompanied by her mother and her mother's boyfriend. And this child was so young and traumatized that she was still sucking her thumb as a stress reliever for herself. So can you imagine this baby girl, pregnant, sucking her thumb with this hovering boyfriend around, who I couldn't ask any details, but I suspect he may have had something to do with the pregnancy.
Sure.
And the mother was holding in her arms a baby that was maybe 6 to 8 months old. So it was very clear that she had been so preoccupied with her pregnancy that she hadn't paid attention to what was happening to her daughter.
Yeah.
And so they showed up in Atlanta, and I had to escort them to their hotel and to the clinic. And it was a multi-day process. And I remember after the abortion was performed and the mother was asked whether she wanted any birth control for herself or her daughter, she said, no, we will not need it. And of course, I couldn't say anything that would have been inappropriate.
Sure.
But I was stunned at how much reproductive oppression there is that can be internalized by people who are victimized by it. That she had 3 other kids in addition to the baby and the daughter she was escorting. So she had a total of 5 children. And she was not very old. I think she was maybe in her late 20s or early 30s herself, the mother. And just how dramatic and tragic it is that we don't have evidence-based sex education universally for all of our children, that a woman would find herself parenting 5 children at that age and then dealing with the unexpected pregnancy of a preteen and not even knowing how to deal with that satisfactorily. And of course, it even begged the question. We had provided funding, the abortion rights movement through our abortion funds had provided funding for the mother and the daughter to travel to Atlanta. But I kept asking, well, who paid for the boyfriend?
Yeah.
Why was he here at all?
Right. Yeah.
And so these situations are so complicated. They cannot be narrowed down to a morality play of should they have an abortion or not. That it's far more complicated than that.
Yes.
To insist that a baby have a baby, I think is just cruel.
Yeah.
Pontificate on these things, assume that they know what other people should do and they have the right to tell them what to do. Don't recognize the immense complications that people are navigating in their lives.
Mm. What's a major hope for you that readers will take away from this book?
That our right to take care of ourselves and our bodies are human rights. And people who are trying to deny us those rights are human rights violators. These are not just matters of opinion. These are decisions that make choices about whether you're going to uphold people's human rights or violate them. And I don't care what economic system you live under, what government you live under, what religious order is applied. The main question is, do they uphold human rights or violate them? That's the deciding line for me, the litmus test for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so let us stop confining ourselves to the limits of the Supreme Court and the U.S. Constitution, because they have proven that what they can give it, they can take it away. Yeah. We have a president that is gladly able to ignore the edicts of the U.S. Constitution. Yes. But we should be able to fight for our human rights and use tribunals and courts of justice beyond the U.S. Supreme Court to protect our human rights. And so that's the main takeaway, that this isn't just a matter of opinion, dueling opinions. It's a matter of whether or not a person is treated with full rights and dignity as a human being, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of gender identity or citizenship, etc. So how can someone get involved in supporting reproductive justice in their own communities? Well, there are so many opportunities to get involved in supporting reproductive justice. First of all, there are a lot of people who have unmet needs that you can support, whether it's supporting an abortion fund, even if it's not in your community, an abortion fund in your region, like in the South or in the Northeast or something, to help the young women, the children, and the people who need support for paying for their abortions get the support that they need. You can, of course, become civically involved in politics. Make sure that we elect people who support our human rights versus those who violate our human rights. So that's another way to get involved. But I think the most common thing and the most urgent thing to do is to normalize conversations about this stuff with our neighbors, with our families, with our friends. Don't act like talking about reproductive politics is something that is verboten to discuss, that is shameful to discuss, that is not a natural part of people's health care, that we should discuss with the same calm that we discuss, having diabetes or cancer or the joyful birth of a baby. We should be able to normalize these discussions to help remove the stigma attached to these kinds of conversations.
The book is Reproductive Justice: An Introduction. Loretta, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank y'all for your great work that y'all do at the Society.
Thank you so much. For our listeners, please make sure to subscribe and rate the show on whatever podcast platform that you use. And until next time, I'm Jeffrey Hayes, and this is ASRM Today.
This concludes this episode of ASRM Today. For show notes, author information, and discussions, go to asrmtoday.org. This material is copyrighted by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and may not be reproduced or used without express consent from ASRM. ASRM Today series podcasts are supported in part by the ASRM Corporate Member Council.
The information and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of ASRM and its affiliates. These are provided as a source of general information and are not a substitute for consultation with a physician.